The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as tourists began gathering outside Buckingham Palace. Among the crowd, Sarah Mitchell pushed her 8-year-old son Tommy's wheelchair closer to the iron gates. Tommy had been born with cerebral palsy, but his bright eyes sparkled with excitement as he clutched a small British flag in his trembling hand. "Look, Mummy, the horses are so big," Tommy whispered, his speech slightly slurred but filled with wonder. Sarah smiled, adjusting his cap against the cool London breeze. They had saved for months to make this trip from their small town in Yorkshire, and seeing the Royal Guard ceremony had been Tommy's biggest dream. The crowd pressed forward as the changing of the guard ceremony began. Tall, imposing guardsmen in their iconic red tunics and bearskin hats marched in perfect formation, their polished boots creating a rhythmic beat against the pavement. Magnificent black horses, groomed to perfection, carried mounted guards with stoic expressions that seemed carved from stone. Tommy strained in his wheelchair, trying to see over the sea of adults surrounding him. His excitement was palpable, but Sarah noticed his frustration growing as people unconsciously moved in front of them. She tried lifting him slightly, but at 35, her back protested against his growing weight. "Can't see, Mummy," Tommy said softly, his disappointment evident. Other tourists, caught up in their own experience, seemed oblivious to the small boy's struggle. Some even pushed past his wheelchair without acknowledgement, their cameras and phones held high to capture the perfect shot. A mounted guard on a magnificent bay horse had been observing the crowd from his position near the palace gates. His trained eye, accustomed to scanning for security threats, had noticed something else entirely. Through his peripheral vision, he watched the young boy in the wheelchair being inadvertently blocked by the eager crowd. The guard, Corporal James Henderson, had served for 7 years and had seen countless tourists pass through these gates. But something about the child's pure excitement and growing disappointment struck a chord within him. Despite the strict protocols that governed every movement during ceremonial duties, Henderson felt an unusual stirring of compassion. His horse, Britannia, seemed to sense her rider's attention shift. The mare had been specially trained for crowd control and ceremonial duties, selected for her calm temperament and intelligence. She stood perfectly still, ears alert, as if understanding that something significant was about to unfold. The ceremony continued with its time-honored precision, but Henderson's focus had split between his official duties and the struggling family in the crowd. He watched as Sarah tried different angles, attempting to give Tommy a better view, but the dense crowd made it nearly impossible. Other tourists continued their chatter and photography, unaware of the small drama unfolding nearby. Children on their parents' shoulders laughed and pointed, while Tommy remained trapped at ground level, his view blocked by a forest of legs and camera equipment. As the formal ceremony reached its midpoint, Henderson made a decision that would soon ripple through the crowd and touch hearts far beyond the palace gates. The rigid training that had molded him into the perfect ceremonial soldier was about to give way to simple human kindness. Britannia shifted slightly, as if sensing her rider's resolve. The bond between horse and rider, forged through countless hours of training and trust, meant she would follow his lead, even if it meant breaking from the established routine that governed their every public moment. The crowd continued to surge and press forward, completely unaware that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Tommy's small hand gripped his flag tighter, his knuckles white with the effort of trying to peer through the gaps between bodies. Sarah's heart ached watching her son struggle, but she didn't want to cause a scene or draw unwanted attention to their situation. In that moment, the invisible barrier between duty and compassion began to dissolve, setting the stage for an act of kindness that would transform an ordinary ceremonial day into something magical and unforgettable. Corporal Henderson's decision crystallized in an instant that seemed to stretch into eternity. Breaking protocol during a ceremonial duty was not just frowned upon, It could result in disciplinary action, demotion, or even dismissal from the prestigious Royal Guard. Yet watching Tommy's continued struggle to see over the crowd, Henderson found himself caring less about regulations and more about the disappointed child. With barely perceptible pressure from his legs, Henderson guided Britannia away from her designated position. The horse responded immediately, her hooves clicking softly against the cobblestones as they moved toward the edge of the crowd. Other guards noticed the deviation, but maintained their positions, trusting their colleagues' judgment even as confusion flickered behind their stoic expressions. Sarah was adjusting Tommy's blanket when a shadow fell across them. Looking up, she gasped softly at the sight of the magnificent horse and rider approaching. The mounted guard's presence was both intimidating and magnificent, his scarlet tunic immaculate, brass buttons gleaming in the morning light, and his bearskin hat adding to his imposing height. Tommy's eyes widened to the size of saucers. His small body trembled with excitement rather than his usual muscle tension as he stared up at the approaching guard. The crowd around them began to notice the unusual movement, some stepping back instinctively to make room for the horse and rider. Henderson brought Britannia to a gentle stop just a few feet from Tommy's wheelchair. The horse, despite her impressive size, seemed to understand the delicate nature of the moment. She lowered her head slightly, her dark eyes soft and curious as she regarded the small boy, who was staring at her with such wonder. "Hello there, young sir," Henderson said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of military training but softened with unmistakable warmth. The crowd around them fell silent, sensing they were witnessing something special. Cameras that had been focused on the main ceremony began turning toward this unexpected interaction. Tommy tried to speak but could only manage a small squeak of excitement. His flag fluttered in his shaking hand as he attempted to lift it toward the guard. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she watched her son's pure joy. But she was also nervous about the attention they were suddenly receiving. "Would you like to meet Britannia?" Henderson asked, gesturing toward his mount. The horse, as if understanding her introduction, took a small step closer to the wheelchair, her movement so gentle it barely disturbed the air around them. Other tourists began forming a respectful circle around the scene, many lowering their cameras to simply witness the moment. Parents lifted their own children to see better, but now they were watching Tommy, not the distant ceremony. The energy in the crowd had shifted from tourist excitement to something deeper and more meaningful. Tommy managed to nod vigorously, his whole body vibrating with enthusiasm. Henderson dismounted with fluid grace, his boots making a solid sound as they hit the ground. Standing beside Britannia, he was even more impressive up close. Tall, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes that contrasted beautifully with his formal bearing. "She's very gentle," Henderson assured both Tommy and Sarah, who was watching with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "She loves meeting new friends, especially brave ones like you." Britannia seemed to understand her role perfectly. The horse took another small step forward, bringing her head down to Tommy's level. Her nostrils fluttered gently as she breathed in the boy's scent, a horse's way of saying hello. Tommy giggled, a sound of pure delight that made several onlookers smile despite themselves. Sarah found her voice at last. "Thank you so much," she whispered to Henderson, her words barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "This means everything to him. To us." Henderson nodded, his professional demeanor softening further. "Every child should have the chance to see the ceremony properly," he replied simply, as if what he was doing was the most natural thing in the world rather than a significant breach of protocol. The main ceremony continued in the distance, but it had become background noise to the magic unfolding near the palace gates. Other guards, still maintaining their positions, caught glimpses of their colleagues' actions. Some felt a flutter of concern for Henderson's career, while others felt a swell of pride at his compassionate choice. Tommy reached out with his trembling hand toward Britannia's velvety nose. The horse remained perfectly still, allowing the gentle touch. The contact was electric for the boy, his first time touching such a magnificent animal and under such extraordinary circumstances. The crowd watched in respectful silence as this simple interaction unfolded, many recognizing they were witnessing something that transcended the usual tourist experience. This was humanity at its finest, wrapped in the pageantry and tradition of one of the world's most formal institutions. The magic of the moment deepened as Britannia began to show her remarkable intelligence and sensitivity. As Tommy's small hand rested against her nose, the horse did something extraordinary. She gently nuzzled his palm, her whiskers tickling his fingers and causing him to break into delighted laughter that rang out clear and infectious across the courtyard. "She likes me," Tommy exclaimed, his speech clearer than usual in his excitement. Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her son experience pure joy without the usual barriers his condition created. Other tourists began to smile and whisper among themselves, many wiping away their own tears at the touching scene. Henderson knelt beside Tommy's wheelchair, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Up close, his military bearing gave way to genuine warmth and understanding. "She definitely likes you," he confirmed, his voice gentle but carrying enough to be heard by the growing circle of observers. "Britannia is very particular about her friends, and she's chosen you as someone special." The horse seemed to understand every word. She moved her head closer to Tommy, allowing him to stroke her cheek with growing confidence. His movements, usually restricted and uncertain due to his cerebral palsy, became more fluid and purposeful as he focused entirely on the beautiful animal before him. "What's her favorite thing?" Tommy asked, his curiosity overcoming any shyness. The question was so genuine and childlike that several onlookers chuckled softly. "Well," Henderson said thoughtfully, "she loves apples, morning gallops in Hyde Park, and meeting brave young visitors like yourself. But I think right now, her favorite thing might be making new friends." As if to confirm this, Britannia lowered her head further, resting it gently near Tommy's shoulder. The gesture was so tender and deliberate that a collective awe rose from the crowd. Cameras clicked softly but respectfully as people captured this moment of connection between boy and horse. Sarah noticed other families with children who had special needs moving closer. A little girl with Down syndrome tugged on, her father's hand pointing excitedly at Tommy and Britannia. A boy with autism, who usually struggled in crowded spaces, stood transfixed by the gentle interaction, his sensory overwhelm forgotten in the face of such beauty. Henderson noticed these other children too. His training had made him acutely aware of his surroundings, and he could see the hope and longing in other parents' faces. Without hesitation, he made another decision that would expand this moment of kindness even further. "Would any other young visitors like to meet Britannia?" he asked, his voice carrying across the immediate area. "She has time for a few more friends before we need to return to our duties." The response was immediate and heartwarming. Parents of children with various special needs stepped forward tentatively, their faces showing a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Henderson's invitation wasn't just about meeting a horse. It was recognition, inclusion, and acceptance all wrapped into one generous offer. A mother pushing a wheelchair carrying her teenage daughter with spina bifida approached first. "Is it really okay?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Emma has been so excited about seeing the guards, but with the crowds—" "Of course," Henderson replied warmly. "Britannia loves meeting people of all ages." He gestured for the family to approach, and the horse immediately shifted her attention to the new visitor, maintaining the same gentle demeanor she had shown with Tommy. Tommy, still beaming from his encounter, began chatting excitedly with Emma about how soft Britannia's nose felt, and how her breath was warm and tickled. The two children, connected by their shared experience despite their different conditions, formed an instant bond that their parents watched with wonder. More families approached, creating an impromptu receiving line of children with special needs, each waiting their turn to meet the remarkable horse and her compassionate rider. The original ceremony continued in the distance, but this spontaneous gathering had become something equally powerful, a demonstration of empathy that transcended protocol and hierarchy. Henderson's fellow guards continued to watch from their positions. While they maintained their ceremonial stance, several felt a profound sense of pride in their colleagues' actions. This was the Royal Guard at its finest, not just as symbols of tradition and duty, but as servants of the people, especially those who needed extra care and attention. The crowd of tourists had completely reoriented itself around this new focal point. Instead of straining to see the distant ceremony, they were witnessing something far more meaningful happening right before their eyes. Many put away their cameras entirely, recognizing that some moments were too precious to view through a lens. Word of the extraordinary scene spread quickly through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Tourists who had been focused on the main ceremony began making their way over to witness what many would later describe as the most moving thing they had ever seen. Social media posts began appearing almost immediately, with hashtags like Royal Kindness and Britannia, the horse trending within the hour. Henderson noticed the gathering attention, but remained focused on the children before him. Each interaction was unique and special. A young boy with autism, who typically avoided eye contact and physical touch, stood mesmerized by Britannia's calm presence. Without prompting, he reached out and placed his hand on the horse's neck, maintaining the contact for several minutes, longer than he had touched anyone outside his immediate family in months. "She understands," the boy's mother whispered to Sarah, tears flowing freely. "He never does this with strangers, but she makes him feel safe somehow." Britannia seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to gauge exactly what each child needed. With energetic children, she remained playfully responsive. With more fragile or nervous children, she became statue still, allowing them to approach at their own pace. Her intelligence and empathy were remarkable, as if she had been specially trained for therapeutic work rather than ceremonial duties. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a child psychologist who had been visiting London with her family, found herself studying the interactions with professional fascination. "This is incredible," she murmured to her husband. "That horse is providing exactly the kind of positive sensory experience these children need. The texture of her coat, her steady breathing, her calm energy. It's like natural therapy." The crowd had grown to include not just tourists, but also local Londoners who had heard about the scene through word of mouth and social media. Office workers on their lunch breaks, shop owners from nearby streets, and even some off-duty police officers had gathered to witness the remarkable display of compassion. Among the newcomers was Mrs. Patricia Williams, an elderly woman who worked as a volunteer at a local special needs school. She recognized several of the families from community events and was amazed to see them receiving such attention and kindness. "In 40 years of working with these children," she said to anyone who would listen, "I've never seen anything like this. That young man in uniform is an angel." Henderson's commanding officer, Major Robert Thornfield, had received reports of the unusual activity and arrived to assess the situation. His first instinct was concern about protocol violations, but as he observed the scene from a distance, his perspective shifted dramatically. He saw the joy on children's faces, the tears of gratitude from parents, and the respectful behavior of the crowd. Rather than intervening to stop the interactions, Major Thornfield made a decision that would have lasting implications. He quietly instructed nearby guards to subtly redirect foot traffic to ensure the special meeting area remained clear and safe. His tacit approval sent a clear message throughout the ranks. Sometimes humanity trumped protocol. A professional photographer named Marcus Chen, who had been assigned to cover the ceremony for a tourism magazine, found himself completely changing his focus. Instead of capturing the traditional pomp and circumstance, he began documenting these intimate moments between the children and Britannia. His trained eye caught the subtle expressions of wonder, the gentle touches, and the tears of joy that painted a completely different picture of the royal guard. "This is the real story," Chen murmured to himself as he captured Tommy's continued interaction with Britannia. The boy had been talking to the horse for nearly 20 minutes, sharing stories about his home in Yorkshire, his favorite books, and his dreams of maybe riding a horse someday. Britannia listened with apparent interest, occasionally nodding, her head as if responding to his chatter. The other mounted guards, still maintaining their ceremonial positions, began subtly adjusting their horses' positions to create better sightlines for the crowd. While they couldn't abandon their posts as Henderson had done, they found small ways to participate in the spirit of inclusion that had taken over the courtyard. One guard, Corporal Davies, noticed a young girl in a wheelchair positioned behind several taller adults. With minute adjustments to his horse's position and gentle guidance of the crowd through gesture and eye contact, he managed to create a clear viewing corridor for her without anyone even realizing they were being directed. The ripple effect extended beyond just the immediate scene. Several families who had witnessed the interactions approached Henderson to ask about visiting opportunities for children with special needs. Others inquired about whether the Royal Guard offered any special programs or accommodations for visitors with disabilities. Henderson realized that this spontaneous moment of kindness was revealing a much larger need and opportunity. "We don't have formal programs," he admitted to one persistent parent, "but perhaps we should consider it." As the afternoon wore on, the energy in the courtyard remained electric with goodwill. Children who had met Britannia lingered nearby, reluctant to leave their new friend. Parents exchanged contact information, forming connections that would last long beyond this single day in London. The tourist experience had transformed into something approaching a community gathering, united by shared witness to extraordinary compassion. By evening, the story had exploded across social media platforms and news outlets worldwide. Marcus Chen's photographs, shared with permission from the families involved, painted a powerful picture of compassion in action. The image of Tommy's small hand touching Britannia's nose while Henderson knelt beside the wheelchair became iconic almost instantly. BBC News picked up the story first, interviewing several families who had been present. Sarah Mitchell found herself speaking to reporters about her son's experience, her voice thick with emotion as she described the transformation she had witnessed in Tommy. "He hasn't stopped talking about Britannia and the Kind Guard," she said. "For the first time in months, he's not focusing on what he can't do, but on what he experienced today." The story reached international news networks within hours. CNN, ABC News, and news organizations across Europe and beyond featured segments about the Royal Guard's act of kindness. Social media users shared the photos and videos millions of times, with comments pouring in from people around the world praising Henderson's compassion and Britannia's remarkable behavior. However, not all the attention was entirely positive. Some traditional military commentators questioned whether Henderson's actions were appropriate, arguing that ceremonial duties should not be abandoned for personal interactions, regardless of the circumstances. A few stern opinion pieces appeared in military publications, suggesting that discipline and protocol existed for important reasons. These criticisms reached Henderson through official channels, and he found himself called to meet with his superiors to discuss the incident. Major Thornfield, who had witnessed the events firsthand, faced pressure from higher command to address what some viewed as a serious breach of protocol. "Corporal Henderson," Major Thornfield began during their private meeting, "your actions yesterday have generated significant attention, both positive and negative. I need you to understand the seriousness of abandoning your post during ceremonial duties." Henderson stood at attention, fully prepared to accept whatever consequences his actions had generated. "Yes, sir. I understand my actions were outside of protocol. I accept full responsibility and any disciplinary measures deemed appropriate." But Major Thornfield surprised him. "However," he continued, "I also need you to understand something else. The Royal Guard serves the people of Britain and the Commonwealth. Yesterday you served them in the truest sense possible. The positive impact of your actions has reached far beyond anything a traditional ceremony might have accomplished." The Major pulled out a thick folder filled with letters, emails, and printed social media posts. These have been pouring in all day. Letters from parents of special needs children, from disability advocacy groups, from people around the world praising not just your individual kindness, but the character of the entire Royal Guard. He opened the folder and began reading selected excerpts. "From a mother in Canada. Your Guard's kindness toward that little boy has restored my faith in humanity. From a veterans organization, this is what service truly means, putting people before protocol when it matters most. From a special needs teacher in Australia, this story has given hope to countless families who often feel overlooked by society." Henderson remained at attention, but his eyes showed his surprise at the scope of the response. Major Thornfield continued, "The palace has received dozens of requests for information about accessibility accommodations and special programs. Your actions have highlighted both a need and an opportunity we hadn't fully recognized." What Henderson didn't know was that his story had reached even higher levels of the royal household. Palace officials, initially concerned about the protocol breach, quickly recognized the overwhelmingly positive public response. Internal discussions had begun about developing formal programs to make royal events more accessible to visitors with special needs. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the child psychologist who had witnessed the events, had written a detailed letter to the palace describing the therapeutic value of the interactions she had observed. Her professional insight added weight to the argument that Henderson's actions had demonstrated something important about the potential role of the Royal Guard in serving all members of the community. International disability advocacy organizations began citing the incident as an example of inclusive public service. The story appeared in newsletters, blogs, and presentations about breaking down barriers for people with special needs. Henderson had inadvertently become a symbol of compassionate public service. Marcus Chen's photographs were being requested by magazines and newspapers worldwide. He had decided to donate any profits from their publication to special needs charities, further amplifying the positive impact of the story. The images were becoming part of a larger conversation about inclusion, accessibility, and the power of small acts of kindness. Meanwhile, Tommy Mitchell had become something of a local celebrity in Yorkshire. His school invited him to share his story with other students, and his confidence had grown remarkably since his encounter with Britannia. Sarah noticed that he was more willing to try new things and less focused on his limitations. The experience had genuinely changed how he saw himself and his place in the world. Social media continued buzzing with related stories as other people shared their own experiences of unexpected kindness from public servants and officials. The hashtag #BritanniaKindness had spawned a movement of people sharing positive interactions with authorities, creating a wave of goodwill that extended far beyond the original incident. Major Thornfield closed the meeting with an unexpected announcement. "Corporal Henderson, effective immediately, you're being assigned to a special project. We're developing a pilot program for accessibility and inclusion at royal ceremonies and events. Your experience and evident natural ability in this area make you the ideal person to help design and implement such a program." 6 months after the incident that captured hearts worldwide, the changes it inspired had become both tangible and far-reaching. The pilot program Henderson helped design had evolved into a permanent initiative called the Royal Access Program, providing special accommodations and experiences for visitors with disabilities during ceremonial events. Every Tuesday, designated as Accessibility Day at various royal venues, families like Tommy's could book special viewing areas with clear sightlines and, when appropriate, brief meet-and-greet opportunities with guards and their horses. Britannia had become the unofficial ambassador of the program, her gentle nature and seeming intuition about children's needs making her perfect for these special encounters. Tommy Mitchell returned to London for the program's official launch, accompanied by his mother and a delegation from his school. Now, 9 years old and more confident than ever, he had been invited to cut the ribbon alongside Henderson and Major Thornfield. The ceremony was attended by disability advocates, families from around the UK, and international media covering this unique approach to inclusive public service. "When I first met Britannia," Tommy said into the microphone, his speech clearer and stronger than it had been a year earlier, "I just wanted to see the pretty horse. I didn't know she would help me feel brave about everything else, too." His words brought tears to many eyes in the audience, including Henderson's. The Royal Access Program had inspired similar initiatives at other historic and ceremonial venues across Britain. Edinburgh Castle, Windsor Castle, and numerous other sites had developed their own versions of accessible programming, often consulting with Henderson and his team for guidance. Dr. Elizabeth Harper had been commissioned to study the psychological benefits of the program and had documented remarkable positive impacts on participating children and families. Her research showed improved self-confidence, reduced social anxiety, and increased willingness to engage with new experiences among children who had participated in the program. Britannia herself had become something of a celebrity, featured in children's books, educational materials about therapy animals, and even a documentary about the healing power of human-animal interactions. Despite her fame, she remained the same gentle, intuitive horse who seemed to understand exactly what each child needed from their interaction with her. Henderson had been promoted to sergeant and now split his time between traditional guard duties and managing the Royal Access Program. His work had been recognized with several commendations, including a special award from the royal family for distinguished service in community outreach. But the recognition that meant most to him came in the form of letters from families whose lives had been touched by the program. Sarah Mitchell had become an unofficial spokesperson for the program, sharing Tommy's story at conferences and events focused on disability inclusion. She had also started a blog documenting their continued adventures and Tommy's ongoing development, which had gained thousands of followers from around the world. The story had also inspired changes in military training programs. Several military academies now included modules on compassionate service and community engagement, using Henderson's story as a case study in balancing protocol with human needs. The incident had become part of official Royal Guard training materials, demonstrating how tradition and compassion could work hand in hand. International visitors frequently mentioned the Royal Access Program as a reason for choosing to visit London. Tourism officials reported increased bookings from families with special needs, children, contributing both to the local economy and to London's reputation as an inclusive destination. Marcus Chen's photographs from that original day had been displayed in galleries and museums as part of exhibitions about social inclusion and public service. The most famous image, Tommy touching Britannia's nose while Henderson knelt beside them, had become a symbol of compassionate leadership and inclusive community service. Other countries had sent delegations to study the program and implement similar initiatives. Representatives from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and several European nations had visited to learn about the training protocols, safety procedures, and community partnerships that made the program successful. On the first anniversary of the original incident, a special ceremony was held at Buckingham Palace. Tommy, now a confident young advocate for disability inclusion, presented Henderson with a handmade card featuring a drawing of himself, Britannia, and the guard surrounded by hearts. "Thank you for seeing me," the card read in Tommy's careful handwriting. Henderson kept the card in his uniform pocket during every shift, a reminder that the most important moments in service often come not from following protocol perfectly, but from recognizing when humanity calls for something more. Britannia, now retired from regular ceremonial duties but still active in the Access program, continued to work her gentle magic with children who needed to feel seen, valued, and included. The ripple effects continued to spread, creating waves of kindness and inclusion that reached far beyond the original moment of compassion outside Buckingham Palace. What had started as one guard's spontaneous decision to help a child see better had evolved into a lasting legacy of accessible public service, proving that small acts of kindness can indeed change the world, one person at a time. The story had become more than just a heartwarming news item. It had become a blueprint for how institutions can evolve to serve all members of their communities while maintaining their essential character and traditions.